Joined, of course, by our press reviewer, Florence Filomeno.
Hi,
Hello. Ukraine continuing to get a lot of attention a day after the Prime Minister and the Cabinet resigned.
That's right. Let's start off with The Independent that points out that the Prime Minister has resigned, anti-protest laws have been repealed, and an amnesty law is on its way, but the demonstrators in Kiev refuse to go. And you can see there it says that those protesters are standing firm. Now, in its editorial, The Independent says that it's too soon for optimism, but this is a welcome sign of progress. It seems like the discredited president is choosing to compromise rather than clamp down. But according to The Independent, he must go one step further, and that's call for a general election.
All right, and the former president of Georgia has penned a piece in the Wall Street Journal about this, hasn't he?
That's right. This is Mikhail Saakashvili. He was president of Georgia from January 2004 to November 2013. And he says why the West must join the Ukraine protesters. But keep in mind that Saakashvili, when he was president, tried to move Georgia out of Russia's sphere of influence and closer to the EU. He says that what we're seeing in Kiev is the first geopolitical revolution of the 21st century. What's happening on the streets of Kiev is basically a fight between two ideologies, according to him, two choices of life, basically Western freedom versus Putin's vision of a restored Russian empire. The time to act is now, according to Saakashvili, and he calls on the West to use more than just words, but to impose sanctions on Ukraine. I pulled out another article, this time from the Kiev Post. Now, this is an article that originally appeared in the London Evening Standard, and it talks about how Ukrainians abroad could influence events at home, specifically rich Ukrainians living in London, because there actually have been protests in London, for instance, outside the penthouse of Ukraine's richest man. And according to this article, the crisis in Ukraine could, cause them some sort of damage for their finances or their reputation. And it's in their power to actually exert pressure on the government in Ukraine. And this article says that in the coming days, we'll see which side of history they decide to fall on.
Interesting, okay. Well, let's move stateside now, and reactions starting to trickle in after US President Barack Obama's State of the Union address.
That's right, those reactions are just starting to trickle in. So I chose an article from the Daily Beast that takes a look at how Obama prepared that grueling speech, as this article in the Daily Beast calls it. This is actually an article written by John Favreau, who actually was a speechwriter for Obama. He wrote 5 of these monsters, as he calls them, and it's a really interesting article that shows just how Obama prepares the State of the Union speech. He starts thinking about it in November and crams at the end. He says that the president puts in back-to-back 2 a.m. nights rewriting this speech, and Obama always wants this speech to, quote, sing and hopefully sway Congress. We'll see if that works or not.
We hear that often about our stories as well, don't we? That word, make it sing. All right, and there's a lot of focus in the American press on the death of the folk singer Pete Seeger.
That's right. I was quite surprised, actually, by the outpour of emotion that we're continuing to see. A lot of the press seeming to suggest that he has big shoes to fill. Here's a cartoon in the Christian Science Monitor where you can see a musician reading a classified ad that says, job opportunity, we need a new Pete Seeger, and he must start immediately. I pulled out an article out of Slate also, which says that Pete Seeger was folk music. He was folk music. It would be difficult to imagine the 20th century without him, especially his influence on the civil rights and anti-war movements in the 1960s. But this article points out it wasn't always love for him. In the 1950s, for instance, he was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. But it's interesting to note that The Guardian, in their editorial, they say that he was authentically America. And once again, they say that he, in many ways, embodied much of what's best about America.
Okay. Finally, you've pulled out 2 articles about France in the international press.
That's right. I pulled out, first of all, an interesting and surprising article in The Independent, which points out that French workers have this reputation of having things easy with their short 35-hour work week, long vacations, long lunch breaks, etc. But according to a recent study, millions of workers are actually at the risk of a burnout, 3.2 million to be exact. So that's 1 in 8, workers. Now, according to this article, 2 phenomena are related. First of all, due to the crisis, and a lot of people lost their jobs, it means the people who do keep their jobs have a lot more work, and due to new technology, they bring their work home with them, so they never really stop. So that's an interesting article in The Independent. But I also pulled out another interesting article in Slate this time that compares the French socialized medicine versus the U.S. healthcare. And this is a piece written by Claire Lundberg. She's an American in Paris Paris. And she talks about her experience of having a baby in Paris and how she discovered the French socialized medical system. And she says that actually it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot more transparent, and it's a lot easier than the American system. So it's a very interesting article, especially in the wake of all this French bashing.
Exactly what I was going to say. It makes a nice change, doesn't it?
It's a nice change.
All right, thanks very much for that, Florence Filomeno. We're going to take a short break, but stay with us. When we come back, we'll be asking if Egypt is experiencing a revolution in reverse. 3 years after the country's uprising, many of those who took to the streets in a bid to rid the country of corruption say the situation now is actually worse. Our correspondents met with 3 activists. Their report coming up in our focus segment.